Hello, everyone. My name is Lucy Letterhandler. I'm the curator at the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba, and I'm happy to welcome you to this artist talk with Diana Thorneycroft. At the end of the conversation, we will be able to respond to any questions that you might have from the audience. We'll get those by you typing them into the comments on whatever platform you're using to view this video. Before we start, especially at this time when we're all working so hard to create virtual space, it can be easy to forget that we are still residing on Treaty 2 territory. So with that, the AGSM would like to acknowledge and honor the fact that we are on the traditional shared land of Cree, Oji-Cree, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, and Dene people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And we would like to express our gratitude for the use of this land. A Prairie Vernacular is a survey of over 100 works of art that was curated by Jennifer McCrory and Joanne Marion. Among those is the 2005 digital print titled Martyrdom Near Moosejaw by Diana Thorneycroft. Diana Thorneycroft was born in Claresholm, Alberta, northwest of Lethbridge, and is currently a Winnipeg-based artist where she works primarily in photography and installation and sculpture. She received her Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Manitoba in 1979 and a Master's in Fine Arts from the University of Wisconsin in 1980. She's best known for her photographic work depicting various aspects of the Canadian psyche, often addressing difficult issues within society from a satirical perspective. In order to address these issues, Diana cleverly creates dioramas of scenes that include non-threatening dolls and sometimes animated pop icons like Disney characters, which superficially gives the work an absurdity as opposed to a seriousness. The resulting photographic portrait of these seemingly innocuous Canadiana narratives presents the viewer with uneasiness in which to contemplate or perhaps unravel the story placed before them. In this time of social distancing, Diana has returned to a practice of drawing and has recently completed a work of stop motion animation, which I, for one, am very excited to see. She has exhibited across Canada and internationally and is the recipient of numerous awards, including the 2016 Manitoba Arts Award of Distinction. Her work can be found in permanent collections across the country, including the National Gallery of Canada, the Vancouver Art Gallery, the Winnipeg Art Gallery, the Art Gallery of Alberta, the Canadian Museum of Civilization, and the McMichael Canadian Art Collection. So with that big intro, I wanted to start, Diana, by asking you about the piece that's in A Prairie Vernacular in this exhibit called Martyrdom Near Moosejaw, which you can see behind me, and the Canadian Martyrdom series in general.
Thanks, Lucy. Just to start with, I want to thank you and Anna for all the work you did setting this up, and I want to thank my friends that have joined us, and especially those friends that would otherwise be taking an afternoon nap. I really appreciate that you are here today. So to answer your question about the development of the photograph, nothing comes out of a vacuum, so it's important to put the image into context. Prior to completing the Canadiana Martyrdom series, which includes Martyrdom Near Moosejaw, I produced a series of photographs called Martyr's Murder. They were based on the book Torment in Art, given to me by Glenn Allison, who at the time was the director of the AGSM and had shown my exhibition The Body, Its Lesson, and Camouflage. The recipe was simple. Take a painting of a martyr being punished and reproduce it in miniature and then photograph it. So here you have The Martyrdom of St. Peter by Zurbaran, a very typical painting. And I took a G.I. Joe doll and maybe hatchets and painted this kind of bad landscape and did my own version. After completing over a dozen images, the last one I did was not based on a real saint. Well, actually, it was a St. Nicholas, but he didn't look like this dude. The use of snow and a typical Canadian landscape in this image took me to the next series. I asked myself, why don't I take well-known Canadian icons and martyr them too? So that's what I started doing. From 2007, 2008, I produced this series. I still use paintings of saints as my template, but instead of constructing backdrops, I decided to use photographs and posters of Canadian landscapes. So here again is another painting by Zubrin, The Martyrdom of St. Agatha. So in real life, she was a 15-year-old virgin who refused the amorous advances of a Roman prefect. When she didn't give in to his demands, he had her tortured and her breasts were cut off. Glad that doesn't happen very often anymore. In my version, here's the martyrdom of St. Anne, obviously Anne of Green Gables. She is the virgin in question. She is shown here with Bob and Doug Mackenzie. They're watching over her, and she is surrounded by moose and elk. And here's a detail of St. Anne with her plate and her precious little breasts. The Martyrdom of Captain Canuck is another piece that I did. This was the template that I used. That the photograph came from that book that Glenn had given me. And here's my landscape of the martyrdom of Captain Canuck. And I have to give credit, this photograph in the background was supplied by Shirley Brown, the famous Shirley Brown. So here you see RCMP pointing at, these are Americans that are trying to take over a farm where Captain Canuck lives. And I want to point out in the background, you have an RCMP who's saying, look, little girl, Captain Canuck's being cut in half. The Martyrdom of the Great One. Of course, everyone knows who the Great One is. The poster in this one was, this is from Banff, Alberta, which is appropriate because the Oilers are from Alberta. So here you have Wayne tied up, shackled to a tree. The previous person being martyred was a ref. So you can see the lion is just eating the rest of the ref. And instead of vultures in the tree, we have rather pathetic Canada geese. And finally, the martyrdom near Moosejaw. In 1995, the Mounties got fed up of people using their image. And the typical image would be the scarlet uniform and the Stetson hat inappropriately. And so they hired the Disney company to market their image. And two examples that they gave of people not using their image properly, these were films. One was a Mountie themed character appearing in a wrestling match, and another was in a porn film. So I'm sure you can imagine what that's like. So in this image, you have Mickey being drawn and quartered. And for me, because the RCMP headquarters is in Regina, I figured Moosejaw, which is close enough, would be a good site for the torture. So Mickey Mouse, the mascot for Disney, and their ruthless copyright infringement policies is being drawn and quartered by the Mounties. And I replicated the Mountie insignia with more encouraging words. Go team, rip that rat apart.
Thank you so much. I don't know if you could see me shifting uncomfortably in my seat. Captain Canuck, I'm sure I'm not the only one. So to continue, I've heard you talk before about all the humor that's in your work, and certainly it's very funny. But I've also heard you talk about how that humor is location dependent. So the difference between a Canadian audience and a non-Canadian audience, or an audience in Winnipeg versus outside of Winnipeg and the rest of Canada. And I was hoping you could speak a little bit to the idea of a balance between the local and the global, as far as your work as art and your work as message.
Sure. It's a really good question, and I have to begin by saying that when I make work, I don't think of an audience except for myself. If I'm not interested in it, I don't make it. So first of all, it has to be very meaningful for me, conceptually and visually, and then I pursue it. And I often do one or two pieces and then things just stop because I'm not interested. And the last thing I really, when I make the work, is thinking about whether the humor is global or international. But what I am aware of is, especially with this series I'm going to speak about, is the use of humor and how humor is familial, and how I find some things hilarious and other people just look at me like, I'm kind of nuts. So the work that has generated most comments, and I have to say more sales and everything, it was a really amazing time, was when I did the Group of 7 Awkward Moments. The first time I showed the work, I remember hearing people laughing in the gallery, and before that I had shown The Body, Its Lesson, and Camouflage, which is very dark, and I was quite thrilled that people were laughing for a change, so it was quite nice. When I began the Group of 7 Awkward Moments, I began with a basic template. Use a poster by a member of the Group of 7, Tom Thompson or Emily Carr, and produce a scene that would be viewed as awkward. So this poster was purchased. I purchased these little figures at Michael's craft store. The tongues weren't attached. I, needless to say, altered it. But here's the piece that comes out of it. And so here you have the famous painting in the background by Tom Thompson, and a group of kids are bullying a boy whose tongue has been stuck to the flagpole. You have a kid who's bled out, and the RCMP are leaving the scene because they can't handle the truth. I have to say that this particular photograph has generated a lot of amazing comments, and people would tell their tongue on cold metal stories. Years ago, I was giving a talk in Shenzhen, China, and the place was packed with a mostly Chinese audience who were not laughing, I have to say, but I heard someone howling in the background, and I turned to Michael and I said, I bet you she's from Canada. Well, she wasn't. She was from Russia, but she got it because of the universality of having your tongue frozen to cold metal. The other thing that I want to mention, as a female artist, it was really important for me to subvert these iconic male painters. So using humor was a tool that was incredibly useful in subverting this very serious approach to Canadian art. The West Wind is another painting by Tom Thompson. I used him more than anyone else because he's absolutely brilliant. So here's a very iconic painting, The West Wind. Here's my version of The West Wind. For the longest time, there was the mystery of how Tom Thompson died. For those of you who don't know, he died quite early. There were several versions of why he died. My theory is that he was peeing over the side of the canoe and fell in. For most male canoeists, peeing over the side of a canoe is universal, but knowing that there is a mystery surrounding Thompson's death is probably not as well known. So you have this image, and I would suggest that Canadians would, well, universally, people who, how am I going to say this? People with penises and bladder issues would get this, but they may not know necessarily the story about Tom Thompson. So, and this is actually one of 3 pieces that deals with his mystery. Northern Lights, again by Tom Thompson. And this one's fairly simple. Hopefully everybody would know that it's an awkward moment when your canoe catches on fire. And again, you remember we had the RCMP saying, look, little girl, Captain Canuck's being sawed in half. Now here you have him in his winter gear and the little girl with her winter gear. And he's saying, look, little girl, that igloo is on fire. This is a piece that's very particular to Winnipeg. And again, I find with the work, I think there is a universal appeal, but when you get down to more of the details, it becomes more personal or local. Another issue, this again, it's called Maples and Birches with Winnie and the Pooh, and it's about copyright again. Even though the word Winnie comes from Winnipeg, Winnipeggers are not allowed to portray Winnie the Pooh, but only Winnie the Bear. So here we have Winnie the Winnie the Bear about to plug Winnie the Pooh. Fairly simple. What can I say? White Pine and the Group of Dwarfs. Again, this is very specific humor. This is the AGSM's painting White Pine in the background. And here you have Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs instead of Tom Thompson and the Group of Seven. And she's having a lottery. Now, I put this in here because Pierre Burton said, a true Canadian can make love in a canoe. So here you have Snow White having a lottery to see which dwarf is going to boink her. And I think that's universal humor. So there she is with the bucket and everyone is taking a number. And even the otter has a number, wants to get lucky. After doing the series about the Canadians, I did a series about Canadians and Americans, best friends forever. It's complicated, which seems more pertinent every day. The recipe again was the same. Take a well-known painting, and in this series, they were mostly by American painters. So this is Portrait of New Orleans by Edward Hopper. Here's my version of, it's called Portrait of Winnipeg. And then in brackets, Life is Like a Box of Chocolates. This was taken during the NHL strike. And you have General Akbar here, and you can see that he and Princess Leia and the Winnipeg Jets, and of course Forrest Gump, they're all having to take the bus, but Akbar and Leia have to take it because their spaceship is crashed, and you can see the smoke from the crash in the distance, and he's got evidence of his suit is still smoking. I don't know where they're going, but she's checking the schedule. And again, it goes down to even more smaller details. You have the Winnipeg Sun newspaper box, but on top is a Tim Hortons cup of coffee. So again, I think Canadians viewing this would get this humor more so than someone from France. The last set I'm going to show you is when I was doing this series, it got somewhat, it did get kind of complicated because the American culture is so big, it's so huge. I had to infuse a Canadiana component. And in this situation, I decided to do a diptych. So this is a horrible painting by Thomas Kincaid called Sunset at Riverbend Farm. And that became the backdrop to the American Bachelorette. So here you have Barbie, who is got her bouquet of roses and grown some farm, and the characters that are all vying for her. The Trump doll, I did this way before Trump even thought about running for president, but the other characters, George Bush, Elvis, Harrison Ford, and Trump are vying for her. Of course, Snoopy's the only one who gets the rose. And there's, you got Forrest Gump. And sometimes I do humor just for me, very personal. I had a cat that once stopped using his litter box and he was spraying over everything. It was a horrible time. So here you have this cat and he's sprayed on Forrest's shirt. So that's just a little joke for me. But I love pointing it out. Then the Canadian component, here's Malign Lake by Lauren Harris. And here you have the Canadian Bachelorette. And of course, the scene is snowy. You have to have the snow and the mountain peaks and the Canada geese and the polar bear in the background and the beaver and the wolf. And you have the contestants vying for the female candidate, Wayne Gretzky, Heather Cleveland, Justin Bieber, Don Cherry, Bubbles, Captain Canuck, he showed up again. Someone must have fixed his crotch. William Shatner, and a female RCMP, because when I made this piece, women could marry each other in Canada, but not in the States. And there you have Anne of Green Gables, and the contestants get a Timbit if they are allowed to stay.
I think that's so interesting as a way to think about universalizing humor, because every person in the world except for Americans has some relationship with Canada, has some relationship with the US. And so,
Yes,
like,
yes,
they're this kind of universal element. So the fact that you're reflecting on that relationship is what makes it universal. It's so
yes,
interesting.
yeah.
So then the other side of the humor, you talked about things that were very kind of, particularly jokes, is that really dark humor, like you saw in the martyrdom, like we saw in the martyrdom series. So I'm not the first person to reference Hieronymus Bosch. When talking about you, you had a 2018 exhibit of your drawings at the Slate Gallery in Winnipeg, and a
No,
review of
Slate,
that.
actually, Slate is in Regina.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
I'm new to the prairies.
Yes, you are. We still love you.
I'll get it. So Slate Gallery in Regina in 2018, and a review of that show called you Bosch's sister. So what I'm interested in that is, in thinking about the local and the universal, it seems like you use humor to push the boundaries of propriety as you think through the message that you're getting across. And then you use the joke to step over that boundary to make it a little bit more accessible. So thinking about timelessness and that universal element of your work, and then thinking about how Bosch is kind of in vogue right now, how now we find something like this triptych very funny, but there was a moment when people read it like he was a crazy person, like he was sick in the head. So in another time, this would be heinous and unpleasant. But I wonder if you have any opinions, any thoughts on the kind of turn that we're in right now, where you think that as a species, humanity, if we're headed towards apathy because we can find something this heinous very funny, or is it a coping mechanism, or is it kind of a new human infancy? Are we starting from somewhere new?
This is such a good question, and I've ever since you wrote it to me, Lucy, I've really been thinking about this a lot. And the first thing I had to do was kind of go back, and I asked myself, why was Bosch so important for me? And he has been for as long as I've been making art. And I found this amazing text Fiona MacDonald wrote in this article. We're speaking in particular of the Garden of Earthly Delights. We are presented with an impossible world, a fantastic world, yet it is at the same time a completely and utterly human world. So I think that's why I personally respond to Bosch, even though he does have creatures and monstrous things, and the acts that are happening are unimaginable. There is a human element, and therefore it resonates, I think, with all of us. For me, it's not so much the garden scene that I liked. I was always more attracted to, it's a triptych, and to the hell component, and in particular to some of the really bizarre human-animal combinations. And I'm going to be showing you a drawing I did when I was much younger, but well, even younger than this next one. But I just want to point out, when I was doing my black and white self-portraits, for a while I was hiring models, and I ended up making this photograph. And I very consciously replicated Bosch's work. The mask that this model is wearing is a drawing that I did based on the painting, and the birds are cut out, and it's, you know, so it's very ethereal and dreamlike. This is a detail from his famous painting, The Last Judgment, which once again, like the Hell series, is filled with monsters and part human and part animal figures. And I did a drawing about 4 years ago based on this. And it's interesting, because I've looked at Bosch so much, I know sometimes I have copied him without realizing it. So this is when COVID began, and we were all in lockdown when COVID began. When the pandemic began, This is one of the first drawings that I did. And I was just drawing from my imagination. But in looking at the Bosch book last night, this is from his Garden of Earthly Delights. And I mean, it's uncanny that even the size and the length is so similar to this. This is a detail from his Ship of Fools. But what I want to address more specifically is I think every artist finds that they start repeating certain motifs over and over and over again, and I certainly have. And for me, the open mouth has been in my work for a long, long time. And I'm going to show you some examples of that. For me, the open mouth, or the mouth itself, it's where the dry outside meets the wet inside. And it's a site where we use our mouths to speak and to talk and to eat and to make love, but mouths can also be violated and penetrated. So for me, it's like a hole that has erotic, life-giving potential and also violence. So it has everything an artist wants in a good story. So this is a portrait I did when I was 18. And I remember I was attending a cégep when I lived in Montreal for a year, and she just asked us to do a self-portrait. And I think it's pretty typical of what 18-year-olds do. But it does, when I look at it now, I see, the open mouth of the spider coming out, and this the snake on the right with this grotesque snot-dripping nose being depicted, and the whole idea of this trauma. Fast forward 22 years, these are two self-portraits that I did, part of The Body, Its Lesson, and Camouflage. The one on the left is called Bridal, and the one on the right is called Penetration Mask. And then more recently, the show Black Forest, Dark Waters, which was at the AGSM. It had its debut at the AGSM. I presented a herd of 150 horses. Half of them were altered, and most of those horses I had re-sculpted their mouths so that their tongues were sticking out, and the tongues acted as, in a lot of ways, as a powerful tool to prevent harm. So they became weapons. And this is a text from an artist statement that I wrote. And I say, like Hieronymus Bosch, whose paintings are filled with chimera committing unimaginable acts and enigmatic symbolism scholars have claimed to be essentially indecipherable, my visual narratives will also force viewers to arrive at their own conclusions. The intent is to keep things unsettled and open-ended. Part of that exhibition, I presented 18 photographs, and I'm just going to give you two examples. And again, you can see the open mouth, the whole idea of tubes and penetration and fluidity, and yet embedded in all of that, there's something gorgeous about the photograph. This one, I should just give you the title. This one is Equestrian and Nutritionist. This one is called Guard on the Edge of the Forest and the Night. And here's a detail of that horse with its porcupine mouth. And in this case, the porcupines are functioning as a weapon, as real porcupines function on the animal. So, Lucy, you say, where are we headed as a people? Is it towards apathy or a greater ability to cope or a new human infancy? And I have to say, I don't know. Like especially during this pandemic, like most people, it's like being on a roller coaster. Sometimes I get so depressed, especially following American news, which I have to stop doing. But and then the deaths, and then the viruses everywhere, and now with the new news about these new viruses and variations, and like you just wonder what can we do? And for me, I just keep drawing, and so I'm going to show you. That's all I can do as an artist. I have to just believe that things are going to get better, and before things get well, I guess they can get worse, but it just seems like we're all in a limbo. And I think the work that I have done since the pandemic began suggests that. And looking at this one this morning, I realized the colors are like the Garden of Earthly Delights, the heavenly part, but maybe it's the middle gate, where it's not exactly hell, but it's not exactly heaven. Again, there's the Birdman and the Bosch influence and the birds flying around. This one is called Tongue Exchange. A lot has been written and talked about the relationships people have during this pandemic, and if you live with someone and how lucky you are if you actually have a partner that you, I'm not saying this is Michael and me, but it is something that I thought about. But what I have to say is that suddenly, in the middle of this last June, I couldn't draw. I had been drawing and I couldn't draw. And I stopped drawing for about 4 months. I tried to draw. Well, that's not true. I just couldn't. But then I tried to draw and I didn't know what to draw. So I thought, okay, why don't I copy a drawing that I did before? That's a place to start. And it never occurred to me. But for those of you artists listening, that's, it's not a bad idea. If you're stuck, just repeat yourself. So I flipped it, and this is the one I did. And it was really great because I then began calling it the Consensual Fluid Transmission Series. And it's very surreal. It's pretty simple because it's a relationship between two people and contraptions and tongues and funnels. So I have done, I'm working on my 5th. I'm just showing you 3. And here's a detail. She's been watching too much CNN. This is hot off the press. I don't have a title for it yet. I don't know if it's part of the transmission series. It could potentially be. But what I'd like to do is end on this last one, which has flowers. And my wonderful granddaughter named it for me, Flower Shower. So I'm ending this talk on a positive note, that there are flowers on the horizon, that spring is coming, that we will all be well, but we still have to wash our hands and wear a mask and keep socially distant. The end.
It's a good reminder.
Yeah.
And it is just so, it's important to be grateful, and it's easy to be grateful, but it does just make you realize what social beings we are and how it just can't get worse than isolation, and there's a way.
Right.
That's just true, So we have a few questions. First, Katie Wilson says that you will be happy to know that she has added Bosch to her tattoo collection recently.
Yay!
We have a question from Cyrus, who wants to know why you consistently choose to keep images unsettled and open-ended rather than making them calm or resolving them.
Because other artists do that better than me. There's so many artists that their goal is to show that part of the world that exists for them. I'm not interested in that. Trust me, I find calmness very interesting, but for me, visually, it doesn't interest me. There has to be some kind of tension and some kind of angst for me to be psychologically engaged in the image.
Yeah. And it seems like you do really gravitate towards awkwardness as intellectually. Yeah. And I have to say, dark humor is really an important part. I mean, it's not all negative. I mean, I did do the Group of 7 Awkward Moments series, and they were, I thought, more uplifting than some of the other work. But I think that series was more unusual. That the work I'm doing now, and especially the animation that you just mentioned that I completed, it's more like
my black and white photographs. I think my comfort level is with discomfort.
Interesting. A Facebook user is asking if you watch a lot of animation because the little toys and colored figures all remind them of cartoons.
Yes, I do, and I have been, because I am doing stop motion, I have been researching a lot of animation lately. And I mean, when I first started doing animation, I thought I could do it myself. Duh, you know, I mean, I think if I was in my 20s, I would be able to put in the hours, the 10,000 hours required to become excellent at it, but I'm not. So I ended up hiring an amazing crew, and they're the ones that have pointed me in the direction of looking at some lot from Czechoslovakia and Polish animation, and it's so hard. I mean, you know, 20 moves is half a second. So, but I love it, and it's certainly, if anyone listening or watching knows my the touring show, Black Forest Dark Waters, that was an animation set ready to happen.
Yeah, totally. We'll post that show in the Facebook later if people want to have a browse of it. So another Facebook user says it was a great talk and they enjoyed seeing your work, and they wonder if your current work is based less on research in comparison to your earlier series.
That's a great question, and I have to say, my drawings are just from my imagination. I, for the longest time, didn't think I could draw from my imagination. I would set up the still life and I would draw the still life. And then it's about 6 years ago now, I was at an artist retreat and we were given 2 little panels to paint on, and I don't paint. I just picked up these little panels and drew and thought, whoa, this is fun. And I just haven't stopped. I think I've done close to 200 drawings since then. And it's just from my imagination. And sometimes I do make a reference, like in Flower Shower, I didn't quite know how to draw. That's a dog face with the big teeth. So sometimes I do look at references, but the overall composition is from my imagination.
And I'm sure that your imagination has a lot more research in it after a couple of decades of
one of the benefits of
doing the research. Yeah.
No, being older. It's funny, I was reading about Hieronymus Bosch. It said, based on his self-portraits, the drawings show that the artist died at an advanced age, probably in his late 60s. I thought, oh, fuck, I'm done for. But I guess back in 1450 or 14, he died in 1516. I guess that was, if you were 65 years old, you were lucky to still be alive.
Yeah,
probably
more magical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another Facebook user is wondering if you keep your sculptural pieces that you photograph or if you dismantle them after you're done or something.
If I keep what? Anna? I mean, Lucy?
If you keep the dioramas that you construct.
Oh, okay.
Or if
I dismantle them. I have to. I keep the components, but my studio has a size limit. I have to dismantle them because I just wouldn't have the room.
Yeah. Do you reuse some of was the Mountie the same Mountie in the different?
Yeah, I reuse them whenever I can. And I mean, in my studio, I have a photograph of it, not in this PowerPoint. I have sections of, like, I have the rocks and the grass, and I have about 5 or 6 different kinds of snow. I have backdrop section. I have, various doll sections. I have animal sections, like all the polar bears and all the moose and elk. And so it's, so I do have a lot, but I set up the tableau, take the photograph, and then once I'm done, I need the space to set up the next tableau.
Yeah. I think my connection is frozen. Am I back?
Yep.
Can you hear me now? Everybody for a second. Okay, so I'm going to transition into the next question because I think that everybody would be interested to hear about your process for making that really surreal light and the way that it blends in to the background painting.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
issue 7, you have a really interesting taking that.
It's really simple, but it's complicated.
Lighting.
It's called painting with light, and it's just a matter of putting your camera onto a tripod, making the space you're in light tight, and then just locking the shutter open, and then you paint the light with a flashlight. So what I do, of course, is now that I've gone digital, which was the smartest, I mean, they stopped using the film I'd been using, so the switch wasn't, I fought it for as long as I could, but I'm so glad it's digital now. I take sometimes up to 50 photographs and then cull through them and pick the best 10, and then out of that best 10, I look for one that has the best light quality, and then I can cut and paste sections from others. So for example, in the one with the kids, the tongue on the flagpole, if and I can't control the lighting because it's my hand holding the flashlight, and I might miss it. I mean, I do it so many times. Sometimes I think, did I illuminate that or not? And sometimes it's I illuminate it too much or not enough. But the great thing about digital is that I can cut and paste sections through all these various photographs and come up with a pretty good collective, if you will, final image. The key is not to bump the camera or the tripod or to change the focal length, because that really screws things up.
You have to start all over again. You do that?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's about how you achieve that really seamless painting to diorama transition.
Yep. Yep.
And so this this Facebook user is wondering how you balance those references of existing works and influences with your artistic progression.
I think looking at other artists' work is really important, and doing research about the topic of which you are interested in is really important if you want there to be conceptual depth in what it is you're dealing with. The key is to not produce work that is an illustration of, say, the theory that you're researching. And that takes time. So, and I work really hard and I do a lot of work. And I know it when I'm first beginning a series, those are throwaways. But making mistakes is really important because you know what not to do. I recommend making mistakes. But it's just really working and working and working and figuring out what you need from others, what you need from the research that compels you to keep going. I used to read a lot, and I don't so much anymore as far as my artistic practice. Now I'm reading more like how to do various stop motion animation programs and things like that. But I'm not reading critical theory anymore. Maybe I don't know if it's in vogue or not. I don't really care. Maybe that's another advantage of being old as Bosch was when he died. But it's about balance and being honest with yourself. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. It answers some question anyway. They can come back if they know I meant. So Seema Goel has a really interesting question. She asks, in your work involving Canadian iconography, how does the racialized immigrant other figure in?
Oh, Seema, hi. Seema Goel is an amazing artist. So I'm just trying to think of in, so you talked about the racialized immigrant more so than, because I did include Indigenous dolls in the series that I did called, I'm pulling the blank, A People's History. And in fact, there's actually, no, you know what, I did a bunch. I did one on Black culture in Nova Scotia, and I did one on Japanese internment camps, and I did 4 on the Indigenous residential schools. And so the premise of A People's History was to show the history of systemic abuse in Canada. And as a white person, I realized that, I mean, there's lots of examples of white people harming white people. When I think of the hockey coach, Graham James, harming those young boys. But I felt by excluding, I didn't want to exclude anyone who was not Caucasian, because God knows in Canada we have damaged our people and people from other countries. So I did include it, and I know a lot of people. David Garneau was the curator of the exhibition, and some of his Indigenous friends found it problematic. And he said in this amazing essay, it was so great, he said, Diana dealing with residential schools is too soon and not soon enough. And I think that shows how complicated that issue is, that we all have to participate in it, and by ignoring it is a form of participation. But we also have to be respectful, and that I think is the key forward. Great. Thanks, Seema, for asking that question.
I'm just going to do one more question, and then I think we should wrap up. So this user would like to know, which body of work of yours do you think was the most influential of your career? And in parentheses, vagina dentata storage facility is forever their favorite.
That's so great. It's that one. It's the vagina juice that was in that. Oh God, that's such a good question. Well, you know, I hope to live longer than Bosch did. So maybe I haven't done that work yet. I can tell you I made the most money from the Group of 7 Awkward Moments because that work sold, and because it's humorous. My parents liked it. So that was good. But, you know, I've moved on from there. So, so whoever that person is, can you get back to me when I'm 85 and I'll give you my answer? How's that for a cop-out?
That's an excellent cop-out. Okay, well, we're gonna, oh, that was Melanie. Melanie will be reaching out to you.
Oh, Melanie! So my friends who didn't have naps, they can go and have naps now.
Yeah, you can have your nap now. We're going to wrap up. We want to thank you so much, and let everybody know that our next artist talk will be with Adrian Stimson in 2 Thursdays from now at the same time, in the same place. And we really appreciate your time and your work. And thanks so much for being with us, Diana.
Thank you. This has been fun.
Yeah, it has. Thanks.